For 20 years, people whispered that Dominic Romano had traded his legs for an empire. The story grew larger, with every retelling. Some claimed he had taken 3 bullets protecting his family. Others insisted he had survived an explosion that should have killed everyone inside the warehouse. The only detail everyone agreed upon was this: Dominic Romano had never stood again. Yet somehow the wheelchair never made him smaller. It made him terrifying. From the highest floor of Romano Tower overlooking Manhattan, the city's most feared mafia boss ruled an organization that stretched from waterfront shipping terminals to luxury hotels. Private security firms, construction companies, and investment funds worth billions. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. When Dominic quietly instructed a judge to reconsider a ruling, it happened. When corrupt businessmen ignored his warnings, their companies collapsed before the month ended. When rival crime families crossed invisible lines, entire organizations disappeared, without anyone ever finding enough evidence to explain why. Federal investigators called him the Ghost King. His own captains called him something else, the man who never forgives. Every morning followed the same ritual. Marcus DeLuca, Dominic's longtime chief of security, arrived precisely at 6:30. The mansion staff maintained complete silence, while Dominic transferred from his bed into the customized wheelchair that had become an extension of his body for 2 decades. Physical therapists had come and gone. Neurologists had flown in from Europe. Experimental treatments had cost fortunes. Nothing changed. Eventually, everyone stopped asking whether Dominic might recover. Even Dominic himself. The official medical reports were neatly organized inside a private archive. 38 surgeons, hundreds of examinations, thousands of pages. Every conclusion identical. Permanent spinal paralysis. Case closed. That certainty remained untouched until one rainy Monday morning when an exhausted woman pulled into the circular driveway of Romano Manor, driving a 12-year-old minivan that coughed smoke every time she touched the brakes. Rachel Brooks stared through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel longer than necessary. She had almost turned the temporary assignment down. Almost, but overdue rent rarely cared about pride. Neither did grocery bills. Inside the back seat, her 8-year-old son Noah looked up from the paperback dinosaur book resting in his lap. "Mom?" Rachel forced a smile. "I'll only be inside for a few hours today. You promise?" "I promise." The lie tasted bitter. Temporary assignments had a way of becoming longer than agencies predicted, especially when wealthy clients demanded impossible schedules. She kissed Noah's forehead before her older sister, Sophia, pulled alongside to take him for the day. Only after watching Noah safely leave did Rachel finally step toward the mansion. The front entrance alone looked larger than the apartment building where she lived. 2 security officers examined her identification without smiling. Inside, polished marble reflected crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. Rachel barely noticed. She had worked inside expensive homes before. Money impressed other people. She was more interested in patience. Marcus DeLuca met her near the entrance. His expression carried the permanent suspicion of someone who trusted almost no one. "You'll address him as Mr. Romano." Rachel nodded. "You won't ask personal questions." Another nod. "You will follow existing rehabilitation protocols exactly." Rachel smiled politely. "I usually follow the patient's condition before I follow paperwork." Marcus frowned. "That's not how things work here." Rachel simply answered, "We'll see." Marcus already disliked her. They entered a private rehabilitation suite overlooking the Hudson River. Large windows flooded the room with morning light. Modern therapy equipment lined one wall. Everything appeared flawless. Too flawless. Dominic Romano sat beside the windows wearing a charcoal-tailored suit, despite having no appointments scheduled. Even seated, he projected the quiet authority of a king receiving visitors. Silver streaks touched his dark hair. A long scar disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt. His eyes studied Rachel for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to judge her, not long enough to dismiss her. "So," Dominic said calmly, "the agency sends a replacement." Rachel stepped forward. "I'm Rachel Brooks. I know your name." His voice carried neither warmth nor hostility, only precision. "You've reviewed my medical file. I glanced at it. You should have studied it. I prefer meeting patients before reading everyone else's opinions." Silence settled across the room. Marcus shifted uneasily. No one spoke to Dominic Romano that way. Dominic finally leaned back slightly. "You think 38 surgeons missed something?" "I don't know." "You believe paralysis is easy to misdiagnose?" "I didn't say that." "Then what exactly are you saying?" Rachel walked slowly around his wheelchair instead of answering immediately. She noticed muscle tone that seemed inconsistent with 2 decades of complete paralysis. His shoulders were extraordinarily strong. His posture remained unusually balanced. His breathing subtly changed whenever he shifted weight. Interesting. Very interesting. She crouched carefully beside him. May I? Dominic gave the slightest nod. Rachel gently examined the old surgical scar that disappeared beneath the edge of his shirt. Her fingertips paused, not on the scar itself, on the muscles surrounding it. She remained silent for several long seconds. The room felt strangely smaller. Marcus watched nervously. Even Dominic seemed mildly curious. Finally, Rachel looked directly into his eyes, not at his wheelchair, not at his reputation, at him. Then she asked quietly, "Mr. Romano, who convinced you to stop fighting 20 years ago?" Nobody breathed. Marcus stared at her as if she had just signed her own death warrant. One nurse dropped a clipboard. Dominic didn't answer. He simply looked at Rachel with an expression no one inside the mansion had seen in decades: confusion. Because for the first time in 20 years, someone hadn't asked whether he could walk again. Someone had asked why he had stopped trying. And somewhere inside the mansion, a man quietly deleted another medical file. He had just realized the wrong caregiver had walked through the front door. No one spoke for several seconds after Rachel's question. The silence inside the rehabilitation suite became almost tangible. Marcus DeLuca instinctively stepped forward, ready to end the session, before the woman said anything even more reckless. Instead, Dominic slowly lifted one hand. Marcus stopped immediately. It was a gesture everyone inside the Romano organization understood. Leave it. Dominic never removed his eyes from Rachel. You believe someone convinced me to surrender? Rachel didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the shelves lining the rehabilitation room instead. Every certificate hanging on the wall celebrated another failed attempt. World-famous neurosurgeons, elite rehabilitation hospitals, private clinics in Switzerland, experimental treatment centers in Germany. 20 years of prestigious names, 20 years without progress. She finally turned back. I believe something doesn't make sense. Dominic's expression remained unreadable. Explain. Rachel folded her arms. Your upper body is exceptionally conditioned. I train every day, I know. You've examined many paralysis patients for 12 years and? I've also worked with spinal trauma patients. Dominic waited. Rachel continued calmly. People who truly lose all function for 20 years usually develop movement patterns very different from yours. Marcus frowned. She's implying the doctors were incompetent, no? Rachel shook her head. I'm saying the story isn't complete. Dominic rested both hands on the arms of his wheelchair. Continue. Rachel slowly circled behind him. May I observe how you transfer? Marcus immediately interrupted. Mr. Romano doesn't perform unnecessary demonstrations. Dominic ignored him. Very well. Without assistance, Dominic locked the wheelchair, placed both hands beside his hips, and lifted himself toward the therapy bench, positioned only inches away. The movement looked practiced, controlled, powerful. Rachel watched every muscle, every breath, every hesitation. Then she noticed it. For less than half a second, his right thigh contracted. Not much, just enough. Most people would never have seen it. Rachel did. She quietly walked around in front of him again. When was the last time anyone tested voluntary muscle activation instead of reflexes? Marcus answered before Dominic could. Years ago. Rachel looked at him. I wasn't asking you, Dominic answered himself. About 18 years. Rachel blinked. 18? The specialists agreed. Further testing served no purpose. They all agreed? Yes, every single one. Dominic nodded. Rachel didn't like that answer, not because it was impossible, because medicine rarely worked that way. Different experts argued constantly, especially over complicated neurological injuries. Complete agreement often meant everyone had relied upon the same original diagnosis. She glanced toward the thick medical binder resting on a nearby desk. May I review your rehabilitation records? Marcus answered instantly. Absolutely not. Rachel looked toward Dominic. My decision. Dominic studied her quietly. Why? I don't treat paperwork. I treat people. But paperwork often tells me where people stopped asking questions. Another long silence. Finally, Dominic nodded once. Marcus, his security chief, reluctantly retrieved the heavy binder. It landed on the table with a dull thud. Rachel expected thousands of pages. There were hundreds, still substantial. She opened the earliest records. Initial trauma surgery, emergency stabilization, neurological evaluations, imaging reports, months of inpatient rehabilitation. Everything appeared remarkably organized. Too organized. She continued reading. Week after week, month after month. Then suddenly, entire sections disappeared. Rachel frowned. "Where are years 3 through 6? Marcus answered. "Archived." "Why separate them? They're old." Rachel looked at him. "So are years 1 and 2. Marcus had no answer. Dominic noticed. "So where are they?" Marcus hesitated. "I'll ask Dr. Graves." Rachel slowly closed the binder. "No." Both men looked at her. "If records disappear before anyone asks for them, someone already knows exactly what I'm looking for." Marcus stiffened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting nobody destroys evidence they aren't afraid of." Dominic leaned back thoughtfully. For the first time in years, something resembling curiosity entered his voice. "Tell me what else you noticed." Rachel walked toward the exercise machines lining the far wall. Every device showed years of meticulous maintenance, hardly any signs of real use. She picked up a resistance band. "What exercises do you perform?" Marcus answered again. "Upper body strengthening." Rachel ignored him. Dominic spoke. "Mostly shoulders, core, a little, hip stabilization, no weight bearing, no standing frame. I stopped years ago." "Why? No benefit. Who decided that?" "My physician." Rachel nodded slowly. "And who has been your physician for 20 years? Dr. Leonard Graves." The name lingered in the room. Rachel wrote it down inside the small notebook she carried everywhere. She wasn't making accusations. Not yet. She simply collected patterns, and patterns were beginning to form. Later that afternoon, Rachel left the mansion carrying nothing except her notebook and growing unease. She picked Noah up from Sophia's house. During dinner, her son happily explained how dinosaurs healed broken bones. Rachel smiled. Children believed healing was supposed to happen. Adults often forgot. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Rachel opened her laptop. She searched every publicly available publication written by Dr. Leonard Graves. Awards, research, medical conferences, board certifications. Everything appeared impeccable, until she noticed one curious detail. 21 years earlier, just months before Dominic's assassination attempt, Dr. Graves had quietly resigned from one of New York's leading spinal rehabilitation hospitals. No public explanation, no farewell interview, no announcement, simply gone. Rachel stared at the screen. Coincidence? Maybe. Then another article appeared, a financial report. The Romano Foundation had donated $15 million to a private neurological institute shortly after Dominic became Dr. Graves' exclusive patient again. Possibly innocent, possibly not. Rachel wrote another note, "Follow the money." The next morning, Dominic entered the rehabilitation suite, expecting another routine evaluation. Instead, he found Rachel rearranging every piece of equipment in the room. "What are you doing?" She didn't look up. "Starting over. I didn't authorize changes." "No," she smiled, "but your body might." Dominic raised one eyebrow. "You really believe I can improve after 20 years? Rachel finally met his eyes. "I honestly don't know." She paused. "But I know one thing. No honest therapist should ever stop asking why." Before Dominic could respond, Marcus rushed into the room. His normally composed face had gone pale. "Boss?" Dominic immediately recognized the look. "What happened?" Marcus swallowed. "The archived rehabilitation records." He stopped. "They're gone. Every box, every document, every file covering the missing years had disappeared overnight." Marcus almost never looked frightened. For more than 25 years, he had survived gang wars, federal raids, assassination attempts, and betrayals that would have broken lesser men. Yet the expression on his face now was something Dominic had seen only once before, the day his father died. "They're all gone," Marcus repeated quietly. The storage room was locked. Security cameras never went offline. But sometime during the night, every rehabilitation file from years 3 through 6 disappeared. Dominic remained silent. His fingers tightened around the armrest of his wheelchair. Not out of panic, out of calculation. Someone had known exactly which records Rachel wanted before she had officially requested them. That meant only one thing. Someone inside the estate had been listening. Rachel broke the silence. "Who has access to your medical archives?" Marcus answered automatically. "Myself, Dr. Graves, the archivist, and you." Rachel nodded. "Anyone else?" Marcus hesitated. "Vincent." Dominic slowly looked toward him. "My cousin." Marcus lowered his eyes. "He oversees family legal affairs." Rachel wrote another name in her notebook. Vincent Romano. Second entry. No accusations, only patterns. Dominic looked toward Marcus. "I want every security recording from the archive hallway." Marcus inhaled deeply. "They're missing too." For the first time that morning, Dominic's expression changed. Not anger, disappointment. Someone had planned this carefully. Very carefully. Later that afternoon, Dominic insisted on continuing therapy, despite everything that had happened. Rachel adjusted the parallel bars. We're doing something different today. Dominic gave a faint smile. You've said that every day, and today I actually need your trust. You haven't earned that yet. No, she smiled back. But your body has. Marcus watched nervously from across the room. Rachel wasn't trying to make Dominic walk, not yet. Instead, she positioned his feet flat against the floor. Don't move, Dominic obeyed. Close your eyes. He frowned. Why? Because you've spent 20 years watching your legs. I want you to feel them. The room became completely quiet. Rachel gently placed one hand against Dominic's abdomen. The other rested lightly above his knee. I'm going to shift your balance. Do nothing. Don't help me. Don't resist. Just breathe. She slowly leaned his weight forward 1 inch. Then another. Marcus noticed nothing. Rachel did. A tiny contraction deep inside Dominic's hip. Almost invisible. There. Again. Rachel smiled. What? Dominic asked. You compensated. I always compensate. No. You initiated. Dominic opened his eyes. I didn't move. You don't think you did. But your brain just sent a signal. Marcus immediately interrupted. Reflex. Rachel calmly shook her head. No. Reflexes don't prepare for balance before movement. Dominic stared at her. Are you certain? No. She smiled honestly. I'm hopeful. For reasons Dominic couldn't explain, hope felt more dangerous than fear. That evening, Rachel drove directly to the public medical library instead of going home. Old rehabilitation journals, archived conference proceedings, court filings, hospital administration reports. Hour after hour she searched. Around 9:30 she finally found something. A disciplinary hearing. 21 years old, the name caught her attention immediately. Dr. Leonard Graves. The complaint had been dismissed, officially, but the allegations were disturbing. Failure to document medication changes, incomplete rehabilitation records, unauthorized destruction of clinical notes. Rachel leaned closer to the screen. One witness statement had been sealed by court order. Another physician had accused Graves of manipulating long-term recovery statistics to protect his research funding. The case disappeared months later. No explanation. Rachel photographed every page. Meanwhile, across town, inside an exclusive private club reserved for New York's financial elite, Vincent Romano calmly poured himself another glass of expensive whiskey. Across the table sat Dr. Leonard Graves. Neither man looked comfortable. You told me the caregiver would be replaced in 3 days. Graves loosened his tie. I underestimated her. You assured me she wasn't a threat. She shouldn't have been. Vincent's voice became colder. She already noticed missing records. Graves looked away, then removed her. Vincent frowned. No, too obvious. Silence settled between them. Finally, Graves whispered the question both men feared. What if Dominic starts believing her? Vincent's answer came immediately. He won't. He stopped believing miracles 20 years ago. Neither man noticed the waiter quietly refilling their water glasses, or the tiny recording device hidden beneath the serving tray. The following morning, Rachel returned carrying several photocopied documents. Dominic noticed them immediately. You worked late. I found something. Marcus crossed his arms. Medical records? No. History. She laid the papers across Dominic's desk. He began reading. His face remained emotionless until he reached the disciplinary report. His eyes stopped. He reread one paragraph, then another. Finally, he looked up. Why was I never told this existed? Marcus looked genuinely confused. I've never seen it. Dominic slid the papers across the desk. Marcus's eyes widened. Dr. Graves never disclosed this, Rachel quietly added. He didn't have to, but perhaps he should have. Dominic picked up his phone. Bring Dr. Graves here. Marcus hesitated immediately. Within 45 minutes, the elderly physician entered the mansion. He smiled confidently until he noticed Rachel. Then the smile faded. Dominic. Graves nodded politely. You wish to see me? Dominic rolled the disciplinary report across the desk. I have a question. Graves barely glanced at the paper. What about? Why didn't you tell me this hearing existed? Graves answered without hesitation. It was politically motivated. You were cleared. I saw no reason to burden you. Rachel quietly spoke. Why were your clinical notes accused of disappearing? Graves slowly turned toward her. I don't discuss confidential matters with temporary staff. Rachel didn't flinch. I'm discussing public court records. The physician's jaw tightened. Dominic noticed. For 20 years, Leonard Graves had always answered immediately. Today he hesitated, only for a second, but Dominic had built an empire reading hesitation. He leaned forward. Leonard, when exactly did I stop trying to walk? Graves blinked. What? I asked a simple question. You gradually accepted your condition. No. Dominic's voice remained calm. I asked for a date. The doctor searched his memory, or pretended to. Rachel quietly watched. Marcus watched. Everyone waited. Finally, Graves answered, "I don't remember." Dominic slowly leaned back. "You attended nearly every rehabilitation session for 20 years. You prescribed every medication. You documented every examination. But you cannot remember when I supposedly gave up." No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than concrete. Graves stood. "I think this conversation has become emotional. I'll return another day." He turned toward the door. Dominic never raised his voice. Marcus, the security chief, immediately blocked the exit. Graves stopped walking. Dominic looked at the physician who had controlled every aspect of his treatment for 2 decades. Then he quietly asked the question that changed everything. "If I authorize an independent neurological evaluation today, what exactly are you afraid they'll find?" Dr. Leonard Graves didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time in 20 years, Dominic Romano had stopped defending his diagnosis and started investigating it. Dr. Leonard Graves stood motionless. For 20 years, no one had ever questioned his authority inside Romano Manor. Not Dominic, not Marcus, not the dozens of specialists who had quietly accepted his summaries instead of reviewing every original examination themselves. Now, for the first time, every eye in the room was fixed on him. Waiting, Graves forced a smile. "You've become suspicious because of a temporary therapist." Rachel didn't react. Dominic spoke calmly. "I've become suspicious because you didn't answer my question." Graves folded his hands. Recovery after catastrophic spinal trauma is emotionally difficult. False hope destroys families. Rachel finally stepped forward. "So does a false diagnosis." The physician's composure cracked ever so slightly. "You don't understand complex neurology." "No," Rachel admitted. "I understand rehabilitation." She looked directly at Dominic. "And rehabilitation only works when someone keeps asking, 'What is still possible?'" Silence returned. Then Dominic reached for his phone. "Marcus." "Yes, boss. Schedule an independent neurological team." Marcus nodded immediately. "No physicians who have ever worked with Dr. Graves, no referrals, no recommendations. I want specialists who have never heard my name." Graves took one hurried step forward. "Dominic, that's unnecessary." Dominic slowly looked up. "For 20 years. I followed every instruction you gave me." His voice remained perfectly calm. "I think I've earned one second opinion." Evaluation began 3 days later. 5 specialists arrived from 3 different states. None of them had previous contact with the Romano organization. Rachel deliberately remained outside the examination room. This was no longer her investigation. It belonged to science. The tests lasted nearly 8 hours. Advanced MRI scans, functional nerve studies, electromyography, muscle activation mapping, weight-bearing evaluations, dynamic spinal imaging. Marcus paced the hallway all afternoon. Dominic remained unusually quiet. No one dared speculate. Finally, the lead neurologist stepped into the conference room. He removed his glasses. "I have reviewed every scan." He looked directly at Dominic. "Mr. Romano, your spinal cord was severely injured." Dominic nodded once. "I know. But it was never completely severed." The room froze. The doctor continued. "You retain intact neural pathways." Rachel slowly closed her eyes. She had hoped. She had never expected certainty. The neurologist continued. "Based on current imaging, your body demonstrates extensive learned non-use." Dominic frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means your nervous system gradually stopped attempting movement because it was repeatedly conditioned to believe movement was impossible." Another physician opened Dominic's medication history. "There is something else." She laid several pages on the table. "For nearly 19 years, you've been prescribed medication that suppresses muscle activation." Marcus stared. "Why?" The neurologist answered quietly. "These drugs are appropriate during early trauma recovery, but long-term use dramatically limits rehabilitation potential." Dominic slowly looked toward Rachel. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Then the lead physician delivered the sentence that changed 20 years of Dominic's life. "You were never guaranteed to walk again." He paused. "But you were never given a genuine opportunity to find out." That evening, Dominic requested a private meeting. Only 4 people entered his study: Marcus, Rachel, Vincent Romano, Dr. Leonard Graves. The atmosphere felt heavier than before a war. Dominic placed 2 folders on the desk. The independent medical findings. No one moved. He opened another folder and financial records. Vincent's expression remained calm. Too calm, Dominic continued. 20 years ago, the Romano Foundation established a permanent neurological trust. He slid another document across the desk. Every year, Dr. Graves received performance bonuses. Graves swallowed. Dominic kept speaking. "The bonuses increased every year. My condition remained classified as permanent." Marcus stared at the numbers, millions of dollars, legally transferred, perfectly documented. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Money. She had followed the money, now the pattern was complete. Dominic turned another page. Vincent. His cousin finally looked up. The trust required approval from one family member. Vincent remained silent. You signed every renewal. Still silence. Dominic leaned forward. Tell me why. Vincent laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because pretending confidence was all he had left. You really want the truth? Dominic nodded. You stopped being a man the day you entered that wheelchair. Marcus stepped forward. Dominic raised one finger. Let him speak. Vincent continued. You became predictable. You needed us. You trusted us. You ruled the empire, while we quietly ruled you. Rachel watched Dominic carefully. She expected rage. Instead, he became frighteningly calm. Vincent smiled bitterly. If you had recovered, you would have discovered what everyone was stealing. Dominic quietly asked. How much? Vincent looked away. Enough. Marcus slammed both hands onto the desk. You betrayed the family. Vincent shrugged. The family became a business. Dr. Graves finally broke. I never wanted this. You kept prescribing the drugs. I was pressured. You destroyed records. I was protecting myself. You lied to a patient for 20 years. The elderly physician lowered his head. He couldn't deny it anymore. Dominic rolled toward the window overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath him. 20 years. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, funerals, victories, defeats. Every memory had been lived from a wheelchair. Not necessarily because fate demanded it, because someone profitable demanded it. Rachel quietly approached. She didn't touch him, didn't speak. She simply stood beside him. After several long minutes, Dominic whispered, I wasted half my life. Rachel gently shook her head. No, he looked at her. You survived half your life, now you get to decide how you'll live the rest. For the first time since Rachel entered the mansion, Dominic smiled. Not the calculated smile feared by politicians, not the cold smile criminals obeyed. A real one, small, almost uncertain, but real. The investigation moved quickly after Dominic authorized federal cooperation. Judge Eleanor Hayes approved emergency warrants. Daniel Whitmore from the state's Financial Crimes Division uncovered shell companies tied to Vincent. Offshore accounts, medical kickbacks, destroyed evidence, witness intimidation. Everything surfaced at once. The empire Dominic had spent 20 years protecting had been quietly bleeding from inside. Marcus personally removed Vincent's security credentials. No dramatic confrontation, no violence, just consequences. As Vincent was escorted toward the waiting federal vehicles, he stopped beside Dominic's wheelchair one final time. You'll never forgive me. Dominic looked up calmly. No, I already have. Vincent blinked. Dominic continued. But forgiveness isn't the same as freedom. He glanced toward the courthouse steps. Justice can have you now. Federal agents closed the vehicle door. Vincent Romano disappeared into custody. Dr. Leonard Graves surrendered his medical license that same afternoon. Criminal investigations followed. The headlines exploded across New York. But inside Romano Manor, something infinitely more important happened. Rachel adjusted the standing frame. Dominic looked at the equipment. I've hated this machine for years, she smiled. Today, let's give it another chance. Marcus quietly locked the support braces. The therapist waited. Dominic placed both hands against the rails. He inhaled deeply. Then, for the first time in 20 years, he pushed upward. His legs trembled violently. Every muscle screamed. Sweat covered his forehead within seconds. Rachel remained beside him, not holding him, simply ready if needed. 1 second, 3 seconds, 5. Then, against every expectation, Dominic Romano remained standing. Not perfectly, not independently, but undeniably standing. Tears filled Marcus's eyes. No one spoke, because no words could compete with what they had just witnessed. Dominic looked down at his own legs, then back at Rachel. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I forgot. The world looks different from up here. 8 months later, the ballroom of the New York Medical Innovation Center was filled beyond capacity. Television cameras lined the back wall. Reporters from every major network waited with notebooks already open. Doctors, rehabilitation specialists, spinal injury survivors, veterans, and families from across the country occupied every seat. A banner stretched across the stage, the Romano Foundation for Spinal Recovery. Below it appeared a new motto, never stop asking why. Very few people knew the sentence had begun as one exhausted therapist's quiet challenge inside a private rehabilitation room. Rachel Brooks stood backstage, adjusting the collar of Noah's little suit. The 8-year-old had grown noticeably more confident over the past months. He looked up at his mother. Are you nervous? Rachel laughed softly. A little. You helped him. I only asked questions. Noah smiled. Sometimes that's how heroes help. Rachel kissed the top of his head. Across the hallway, Marcus approached. The once intimidating security chief looked almost like family now. He crouched beside Noah. Ready? Noah grinned. Mr. Marcus, is Mr. Romano really going to walk out there? Marcus glanced toward the closed auditorium doors. He insisted. Rachel immediately frowned. He shouldn't push too hard. Marcus smiled. Tell him that. Behind another curtain, Dominic Romano adjusted the sleeves of his navy blue suit. His wheelchair still stood nearby. He hadn't abandoned it. Recovery wasn't magic. Some days he walked farther than others. Some days his body reminded him 20 years could not be erased in 8 months. But every week he stood a little longer. Every month he needed a little less assistance, and every victory belonged to effort instead of illusion. One therapist approached. Mr. Romano, the audience is ready. Dominic nodded before moving toward the stage. He looked at the wheelchair beside him. For 20 years, he had believed it represented the end of his future. Now it simply represented one chapter of his life, nothing more. He placed one hand on the armrest. Thank you. Then he left it behind. The announcer stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Dominic Romano. The audience erupted into applause. Everyone expected to see the famous wheelchair appear through the curtains. Instead, the applause slowly faded into stunned silence. Dominic entered on his feet. A lightweight cane rested in his right hand. His pace was deliberate, measured. Each step required concentration, but every single one was undeniably his own. No dramatic music played. No theatrical spotlight followed him. Only the quiet sound of shoes meeting the stage. People began standing, then another row, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom rose in a standing ovation. Rachel covered her mouth. Marcus quietly wiped his eyes. Even seasoned reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. Some moments deserved to be witnessed before they were recorded. Dominic reached the podium. He waited until the applause settled, then smiled. I should probably begin with a confession. Soft laughter spread through the audience. For 20 years, I believed I understood power. He rested both hands on the podium. I believed power meant people feared your name. I believed power meant controlling every room you entered. I believed power meant never appearing weak. He looked across the audience. I was wrong. Silence filled the hall. The strongest person in my life arrived, driving an old minivan that sounded like it needed divine intervention to reach my front gate. Laughter echoed again. Rachel shook her head in embarrassment. Dominic smiled warmly toward her. She wasn't impressed by my money. She wasn't frightened by my reputation. She wasn't interested in my empire. She only wanted to know one thing. He paused. Who convinced you to stop fighting? The room became completely still. For 20 years, I believed doctors had taken hope away from me. They hadn't. People had. He slowly looked around the audience. They stole records. They manipulated treatments. They convinced me certainty was safer than possibility. He drew a slow breath. But they never actually stole my future. I surrendered it. He turned toward Rachel, and one woman had the courage to hand it back. The audience erupted again. Rachel immediately shook her head. No, she whispered from her seat. Dominic heard her. He smiled. She'll tell you she performed no miracle. She's right. She simply refused to believe a lie everyone else accepted. He stepped away from the podium, slowly, carefully, walking without assistance for several more steps before stopping directly beside Rachel. The audience watched in complete silence. Dominic extended his hand. Rachel accepted it. He didn't kneel. He still couldn't. Recovery remained unfinished. Instead, he looked directly into her eyes. When we first met, I thought you came here to help me move. A gentle smile crossed Rachel's face. You helped me move much farther than that. Dominic continued. You gave my life back. Rachel squeezed his hand. No, I reminded you it was still yours. Noah suddenly stood from his seat. Mom. Everyone turned. The little boy looked at Dominic with complete innocence. Does this mean you're coming to my baseball game next week? The audience laughed. Dominic smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Noah nodded seriously. Good, because my team needs someone scary in the front row. Even Marcus laughed aloud. Months passed. The Romano Foundation expanded across New York. Thousands of patients received second opinions before accepting life-changing diagnoses. Hospitals introduced mandatory independent reviews for long-term paralysis cases. Medical transparency laws strengthened. Dr. Leonard Graves eventually pleaded guilty to multiple criminal charges involving medical fraud, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy. Vincent Romano received a lengthy federal sentence for financial crimes, obstruction of justice, and organized corruption. Justice arrived quietly, exactly as Dominic preferred. Inside Romano Manor, the atmosphere changed completely. The rehabilitation room became the busiest room in the house, not because Dominic trained there alone, but because he opened it to others: veterans, accident survivors, teenagers recovering from spinal injuries, children learning to walk again. The empire that once inspired fear now quietly funded hope. One afternoon, Rachel finished another therapy session. Dominic managed 12 unsupported steps before sitting, a personal record. He looked at her. "What now?" Rachel smiled. "We celebrate for exactly 5 minutes, and after that we practice 13. Dominic laughed. "I should have known. You hired a stubborn therapist." Rachel corrected him gently. "No, you trusted one outside." Noah raced across the estate lawn, chasing a baseball, while Marcus pretended he couldn't catch him. Their laughter drifted through the open windows. Dominic watched them for a long moment. 20 years earlier, he had believed his story ended with one gunshot. Instead, it had simply paused. Sometimes the greatest prison is not made from steel. Sometimes it is built from certainty, strengthened by fear, and locked by the people we trust most. The key is rarely a miracle. Sometimes it is simply one courageous person, willing to ask the question everyone else stopped asking. Looking back at Dominic Romano's story, the first thing that matters is that his recovery did not begin with a miracle. It began when Rachel Brooks refused to accept a 20-year-old conclusion without looking at the man in front of her. Dominic had spent 2 decades being told his paralysis was permanent, and the same physician, Leonard Graves, had guided nearly every stage of that treatment. Rachel noticed details that did not fit the diagnosis, including muscle activation, unusual movement patterns, and rehabilitation records that suddenly disappeared when she started asking questions. That was the first sign that Dominic's condition was not simply a medical tragedy. Someone had been protecting a story. As Rachel kept digging, the pattern became harder to ignore. Graves had a disciplinary history involving missing clinical notes, while years of Dominic's rehabilitation records vanished from storage before they could be reviewed. An independent team finally examined Dominic without relying on Graves, and their findings changed everything. His spinal cord had been severely injured, but not completely severed, and intact neural pathways remained. The specialists also discovered that medication intended for earlier trauma recovery had been continued for nearly 19 years, suppressing muscle activation and limiting his rehabilitation potential. Dominic had never been promised that he would walk again, but he had also never been given an honest chance to discover what his body could still do. The medical findings led directly to the financial betrayal. Dominic learned that Graves had received increasing bonuses while his condition remained classified as permanent, and that Vincent Romano had approved the trust supporting those payments. Vincent finally admitted the reason. A dependent Dominic was easier to control, and his disability gave people around him cover to steal from the empire he believed he still ruled. Instead of answering betrayal with private violence, Dominic cooperated with investigators. Vincent was taken into federal custody. Graves surrendered his license and faced criminal charges, and the hidden corruption inside the Romano organization was exposed. What happened afterward is what gives the story its real ending. Dominic stood in a frame for the first time in 20 years, then spent months rebuilding strength without pretending recovery was easy or complete. 8 months later, he walked onto a public stage with a cane, still acknowledging that some days were harder than others. He also turned his experience outward, creating the Romano Foundation for Spinal Recovery and opening rehabilitation resources to other patients who needed second opinions and better care. Rachel never claimed to have cured him. Her most important contribution was simpler and more powerful. She made him question the certainty that had been used to control him. That is also why the betrayal here feels deeper than ordinary financial corruption. Graves and Vincent did not only take money. They helped shape what Dominic believed was possible for his own body, and that gave their deception control over years of his life. At the same time, the story is careful not to turn recovery into a fantasy. Dominic still needed a wheelchair, a cane, therapy, time, and patience. His progress mattered because it belonged to him, not because it erased disability. When a trusted medical authority controls both the treatment and the explanation for why nothing can improve, questioning that authority becomes extraordinarily difficult. Dominic's power in every other part of his life did not protect him from that dependence. The other point worth noticing is Dominic's decision to separate forgiveness from accountability. He could tell Vincent that he had forgiven him and still allow the justice system to handle what Vincent had done. That distinction matters because forgiveness did not require Dominic to restore trust, remove consequences, or pretend the betrayal was harmless. Rachel gave him back a question, but Dominic made the decisions that followed. He investigated, accepted uncertain rehabilitation, and used what happened to change how other patients would be treated. If you were in Dominic's place, could you forgive the cousin and doctor who controlled so much of your life while still making sure they faced the consequences? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. If this story kept you listening, like the video and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, justice, and second chances. Most of all, remember how much can change when someone finally asks the question everyone else stopped asking.